Any additions or deletions from the agenda? Nope. Okay. Any public comment? I don't think we have any public here currently. Nope. Oh. Okay. Would anyone like to move on the minutes?
Oh, I will.
It's by consensus.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Andrea. We always forget. Then are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? No, then I consent. Alice, do you consent?
Yes, thumbs up.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then I guess we're now on to the debriefing of remote learning. Take it away, Jess.
I am wondering if we want to debrief remote learning by diving into the survey and then seeing what gaps we want to fill after that in terms of generally discussing it. How's that sound?
Okay, that sounds fine to me. I noticed that you just sent out the survey results.
Yep.
So just, I know you're kind of new here, but normally we try and send them out a week before with the agenda, and if not, send them as an addendum so that way we can all kind of review them and have a better discussion.
Okay, I can try to do that, but as you know, the results were not available. And so this was really the chance I got to compile all of the results into slides for you all. So
what was the end date for the student survey? Because
the students was the 12th and the teachers was the 19th. And so, and really, you know, a lot of other deadlines and things going on, did not really touch a lot of the survey results until the weekend. And also didn't know if we wanted to treat it kind of like the presentations that the curriculum presentations, where people kind of share their presentation and then we attach the slides to the minutes like we have in the past. So knowing that folks, there's varying levels of preparation that folks are able to do for the meetings, I thought we could walk through it together so we all kind of have a common experience.
Okay. How many, just a question, I didn't get a chance clearly to read the email yet.
No, I didn't expect folks to read it in 2 minutes before this meeting.
How many were sent out as paper copies and received back?
It was consensus of the instructional leadership team not to send out paper copies because given how tech heavy the remote learning was, they felt it was kind of counterintuitive to send out a paper survey that was about basically a very technology-based experience that students had. So we know everybody basically had access to technology. So it was pumped out through a lot of different Facebook, IC Messenger, things like that.
So from my understanding in our previous meetings, we do have some people who have not been fully hooked up, we'll say. So we're essentially discounting anyone who doesn't check their email, doesn't check in, would have a totally different opinion of remote learning based upon the fact that they're not tech savvy.
I'm going based on kind of the recommendations of the instructional leadership team that said it would be silly to send out paper copies, and that most people were accessing. I mean, every student was at least accounted for at some point during this journey through technology. So it was the assumption that this would do it.
Okay. Okay, well, take it away.
We got a pretty good response rate for a survey. So
I just wanted to hop in for a sec before we forget. So Jess, anything like the survey that just went out, if you can please get that to Tina, because it is supposed to be posted online with the packet.
Yeah.
And yeah, it normally is the standard that whatever is going to be distributed goes out with the packet so that everyone has a chance to review everything prior to the meeting.
Hopefully you'll see that we'll have a kind of an experience to digest it all together. And in the future, I will try to get things in advance. We've hand carried things before, so I'm sorry if you expected it sooner. All right. You could be in the PDF I sent, or you could just be watching your screen. I really want to just give you kind of dual ways to view the results. And let me share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to rearrange all my little tiles and gizmos here. Okay. So as you know, the student survey closed on the 12th, the teacher survey closed on the 19th, and the family survey closed on, will close on June 30th. So we really don't have all different perspectives ready to view together. And the family survey is the only one that this group really gave a lot of feedback into the creation of, given this is kind of a liaison group to the community as well. So tried to compile kind of as much as was feasible in kind of in a palatable format for this group, and given the kind of like big picture context of this group, and kind of left the focus at that level. So I was hoping that as we review the data, if you could be jotting down kind of what do you want to celebrate. You know, we have a lot of people who have worked really hard to try to pull together this emergency learning plan. And so certainly there are things to celebrate in the results. What raises concerns or surprises for you? And maybe even, you know, Victoria's comment that we didn't reach a few families who may not have any technology access whatsoever. That certainly would come under kind of raising concerns or surprises. And then specific implications of the results. And so I propose that we kind of check out the student results and then kind of process all as a group. What do we want to celebrate? What concerns or surprises are there? And what are the implications? And we'll just kind of go one question at a time and let everybody chime in so we can kind of learn from each other's responses. So are there any questions or anything before we dive into the results? So you'll see from the student survey, we had a pretty healthy response rate. You know, it's about 19% of the student body around there. That is not bad results for a survey, right? I mean, sometimes you have some people who say like a 3% response rate is something to celebrate. So we've got a pretty good amount of respondents. You have them broken down by grade, and this wheel, some of the percentages are not really there, but if you check out in the colors, I find the colors a little bit hard to distinguish, but when you get to that many categories, there's only so many to go around. You'll see the blue right there, starts with pre-K and it follows the wheel around. So that's where you can see kind of how the distribution is, which is not a bad grade distribution as well. So you've got about a third almost of respondents from each school, and a really good cut of all different grade levels. And then here we go, and this is why the PDF might come in handy if you want to be following along on that. But the question that we asked, which does mirror some questions in the teacher and the family survey as well, to try to give some comparison between different stakeholder groups. Taking the unique emergency circumstances into account, rate your level of agreement with the following statements. And so they're arranged really in the level of strongest agreement down, and I'll just give you a few minutes to kind of digest what is there and be really thinking about what do you want to celebrate, what concerns you, or what are some implications. And I'll give a few minutes. And feel welcome to pop in with any clarifying questions or things I can help with.
Jess, I wonder in the future when hopefully we don't have this happen again, but who knows? Would it be possible to disaggregate this data by grade level or school level, like K through
Yes.
5, 6, 7, 8, then 9 through 12, and then the Career Center? Because for me, I think that's a small percentage for 150 kids, but I would just be really curious as an administrator what I could improve upon if this were to happen again.
Some of the implications that I came up with, and you'll see that at the last slide, is really the next step we have to do is dig in at the grade level, at the school level, even content area potentially for some of the teacher responses, to give that data directly to administrators in buildings to figure out what they want to do with it. So yes, absolutely. as you know, if you've ever worked in like Google Sheets and all of this jazz, disaggregating a Google form survey it takes a lot. It's a lot of work. So we'll get there at the school level soon, hopefully. Oh. Give another 30 seconds or so on this one. And if you're on the PDF, you can always kind of go back to this one with extra time on other slides if you want to give this a deeper dive. So as we move forward, what has been most helpful to you while remote learning? And David and I were chatting earlier today, and you just got to laugh that out of all the tech tools that we have in this world, that, you know, good old email is right up there as one of the most helpful, right?
Well, but I would also question on that, knowing that most students probably received emails from their teachers. I can say my children never really received instructional videos, never went to office hours. They didn't check the school website. So probably you checked what was most familiar with you and what you received.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you didn't receive it, then clearly it wasn't helpful.
Okay. So gave a little bit more of a dive just into some specifics on this question, because the other, I think some interesting themes kind of came up. I mean, there wasn't a lot in terms of variance of, 7 students said parents were super helpful. We know a lot more parents were actively involved, but this is what came up in the other when they checked it and wrote in. Some felt they didn't need help. The flexible time, that's a theme we're going to see come through a lot of this, that the flexible time and working at one's own pace was really beneficial for students. I wanted to give you a little bit of insight there. And then what were some positive aspects for you about school and remote learning? Again, that being able to work at one's own pace is just highlighted in several different areas by students. Okay. And then just some of the highlights of other. Okay. And then biggest challenges for you in completing schoolwork during remote learning. And as I look at this one, I think, some of this, we've created a culture around remote learning, and it was really created on the fly in an emergent way, right? We had a pandemic to immediately respond to, and it might not be the expectations that we want to set in any future remote learning. So some of this will kind of give us some insight into what we really need to tighten up for any future remote learning situations. And here are some interesting other category responses.
I think if you compared the response to the question or the statement, the work was boring, compared that to an in-classroom survey, you'd probably find that it was about the same.
Right?
Well, I was going to say it's interesting that in some of the previous, or the first slide that you showed us, showed that a good percentage of students thought the work was challenging and appropriate, and a good percentage of students said that they enjoyed being able to manage their own time. But then in later slides, students said the work was boring, or it was difficult having to manage my time.
Yep.
If I can just add an observation, this is Chris. I've got my video off because I have a very bad internet connection here. I'm hoping that works. But the one thing that I saw in this that really hit me in a very positive way was that over 2/3 of the kids felt connected in some way to the school.
Yeah.
That is where I was losing a lot of sleep in the last 3 months, and that's higher than I expected it to be, and it's a bit of a relief because I feared it was we weren't doing it that well despite our best efforts. That was good to see.
Good. And as we kind of dive into analyzing the data and kind of pointing out things to celebrate, we can just quickly go by the top tech tools, which I think would just be most helpful in kind of comparing what teachers felt were the top tools they used versus how students consumed those tools. Will be really interesting. And then it will certainly guide a lot of PD and targeted support going forward. But again, if your teacher didn't use one of these things, you didn't select it. But that, again, it gives us, a certain level of results in knowing what was used and what wasn't used widely. Why don't we stop there? Because then we can talk about the educator survey separately. So what do folks want to celebrate? And I'm happy to Zoom. Yep.
Just a quick point. Did you record the meeting?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any celebrations?
This is Brenda. I would say that my celebration, I think, for all of this work was what we were able to accomplish literally overnight. And had this been planned out where we said we were going to remote learning, we could have planned for 5 years and probably not accomplished nearly as much. And I think that there's a lot we can take away from this experience.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Well,
That's kind of, oh.
This is Tim, and one of the things that I'm really excited about is this should be a game changer, because now lots of kids and lots of families who had issues about going to school now see that doing your school from home is really easy. So ultimately, we could cut staff at the school, we could cut school size, we could do a lot of cutting to actually make this far more functional, and especially we put a lot more effort into the classes.
Well, that's what kind of, I can piggyback on Brenda and Tim right now. One of the things that I looked at was that 30% believed that they learned better, which I think is clearly a great thing. So maybe we found some kids who were better learners outside of a classroom setting. And then also I noted that 35% said that they felt safe, which I know one of our bigger concerns was the kids who were home in a not so safe environment. And that's kind of, I'm looking at that 35% saying that they felt safer doing online school than they did in regular school. And so again, maybe those kids are better off in an online environment, and now they've discovered that.
And it's funny, I think there's a lot of different interpretations that we could make. And I didn't even, I was thinking about as students felt safe from becoming ill from COVID. And so I think there, we could have maybe had clearer descriptions of some of these questions to get at a bit more information for sure.
One thing that sticks out to me pretty clearly, and I think it's good news because we can carry it on to our in-person teaching, is the high percentage of students who said that they liked independence and flexibility with their assignments. And distance learning meant as a teacher, you had to let them be flexible because you didn't have them all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think we should really look into how is that valuable to students and how could that be reflected in our in-person teaching.
Mm-hmm. I'm taking your verbatim notes, by the way. Okay. Other things to celebrate? It's a lot to digest, I know.
For me, I think one of the other things is just getting kids to be more tech savvy is something to celebrate in itself. The fact that we were able to get preschoolers, kindergartners, first graders, kids who really had not been exposed to technology on that level yet, actually learning on that medium. And I think that's great.
It isn't necessarily reflected per se here, but I think that also our communication with families, we really put a lot of effort into that, and that connectivity of where parents, I think, have a better understanding of what goes on in school settings and what their child's learning looks like. I think it was a big gain.
Mm-hmm.
I know for us with CTE, as you know, 3/4 of our curriculum is hands-on. So this was quite a challenge for the Career Center to pull off. But being late in the year, that was one of the benefits. But we were also able to see how independent our students were and how they were able to take on projects that we assigned and their responsibility for responding and staying in touch with their teachers. I think we had 96% attendance rate every day. So I find that to be a huge celebration. That's probably better than in person.
And I think as I look at this chart that we're seeing, I mean, values that we hold in person held up online, like clarity, feedback, fair grading and feedback practices, productivity through, work completion, all of those things translated to students at home as well, which is exciting. Other celebrations? All right, concerns or surprises?
That's one of mine that I noted was that 32% didn't feel connected to school. And that's what, again, when we were talking about how the communications from the school was so great that we were getting emails out, we were getting, everything posted on Facebook, everything on the websites, everything everywhere. It's a little concerning to see that 32% still didn't feel connected. And if we were ever forced into that situation again, how we could change that.
I think on that note too, we could define what connection means. Is it connection with their peers? Is it connection with their teacher? That connectivity, I think our teachers might answer that question the same way, that they didn't feel connected, but.
It makes me think of, one of the things that the state of Vermont is looking for as we move forward with restarting school is connecting with kids on a social, emotional level. And it makes me think about how on a regular school day, the number of students where the connection to them might mean that they really need to see that valued teacher in person, that he says, hey, Tommy, hey, Susie, how's it going today? That's the kind of connection that they need. So it just makes me think about, the value of those connections and how to keep them continued, whether it's online or in person.
I would agree with that, David. I also find that with our student population, there's a lot of days in a row that our students don't necessarily have a connection with an adult in their life. So whether the work schedules or where they're housed or however that living situation is set up, it's very common because we have a lot of challenges getting even paperwork signed and turned back in with just our students having a connection with an adult. So that's the way I read connection.
I would also say this is two-dimensional, and so much body language and facial expressions, that's a lot of connectivity. Just smiles, for example. greeting people in hallways. Those are things that were lost in this experience.
Their concerns or surprises? You know me as a former teacher, I'm good at wait time.
I think it's more of an observation I have, and so I don't know if you want me to hold that.
No, go for it.
I feel like this may have expanded our toolbox, but I don't think it's an either or. I think that there are things we have learned through this experience that can benefit some of our students, but I don't think that all remote learning in its exclusiveness is going to meet students' needs, just like all full classroom experience don't necessarily meet full student needs. So kind of blending some of the learning experiences more might be the most optimal.
Thank you. Okay. Concerns or surprises going once. Going twice. All right. Implications. This might be, what you think the admin team might do with this data. Could go from kind of the broad, just even breaking down the data as Penny was saying, breaking it down by school, grade level.
I know I'm excited to see it broken down. That way I can really focus on what are the top, areas that we need to look at. So it's hard for me to conceptualize numbers in such a large scope.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's helpful, but it's pretty generic in general for me right now.
I would say also some of the difficulty with the combined data is like understanding assignments. So if 3 of your classes out of 4 you were good to go and you had difficulty with math, for example, you might have answered that question based on I was really struggling with my math class, and it's not necessarily their overall general experience. And so knowing how we might be able to better communicate resources when there are struggles, regardless if it's remote or in person, might be a better way to help our students understand how to ask for help and communicate their needs.
Well, and I would also kind of echo that in that, high school students may have all said that they had no problems completing their assignments. Let's say pre-K to 4th grade, were all the respondents saying that they didn't understand. Because again, these are kids who are still learning those kind of homework practices. And in fact, our homework committee recommended that they not do homework. So again, that would be much more difficult for these kids to understand their assignments when they don't have an active teacher there all the time, because that's what they're used to.
I'm surprised that the internet access challenge is only 12%. I thought that would have been much higher. Look at the challenges we have in our adult meetings with connectivity and losing, it happens in every meeting. So I'm surprised that's at 12%. That's good that it's at 12%.
Well, but I would also say that's a skewed statistic based upon the fact that if you didn't have enough internet access to fill out the survey, then you have no response.
Right.
I'd like to piggyback on something that Victoria said, thinking about understanding assignments and homework. And I heard you say that the committee is, recommending less homework, and that's a general good practice recommendation. But my thought was, So it seems that distance learning shouldn't look like traditional homework. And when you give traditional homework, it shouldn't look like traditional homework. It should look like good distance learning. More engaging, more active.
I feel like an implication that might lead us to the teacher survey or educator survey, because Paras also did fill out that one. Just the sheer number of tools that were used, and really making sure that we have some that we are using district-wide in common, or at least grade level, grade spans in common. This was really a catch as catch can, and some people were comfortable with different tools than others. And what are the common tools that we need to identify that we're really using with all students? All right, ready to move to the educator survey?
Jess, is there a way to put numbers next to the bar graph on the tools that, like if it's Google Draw, was that only 4 kids or was that 34 kids?
I will, and you'll see, as I kind of got deeper and deeper into playing with how to visualize this, you'll see in the educator one, it's a little bit more ranked. It's just not pretty. So there'll hopefully come a time where I can figure out the best way to get this in a presentable format for you all. Yeah. It's not very helpful the way it is right now. But moving to the educator survey. So this one, I think when the instructional leadership team drafted this one, I think we intended that it would go more toward instructional staff, so teachers. But Paras wanted to take it, and it was already distributed. And so at this point, I'll need to go back in and actually code the email addresses to what the person's role is, to start to suss out what teacher responses were compared to para responses, just to kind of give you some background on this one. But you'll see that we have a high response rate from Berrytown. It's almost 50% of respondents are from Berrytown. That was something that I noticed, but still a really good response rate of almost maybe 50%, which isn't bad. And I know, people were scrambling last week. Last week was narrative reports and all that. So understanding that some folks just were not able to prioritize taking this. So this section is not as pretty because I certainly did not have enough as much time with it as I would have liked. But biggest challenges related to remote learning. Check that out.
Jess, when was the survey released to teachers? What date?
Oh, I'd have to check my email. I think it was probably about like 2 weeks before the end of school, I would say.
It's a real chaotic time, but yeah, okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they were all drafted and put out as kind of fast as we could in the crunch time of the end. But I will also, while you guys are reading this, I will check my email, see the exact date it went out. Remember, we're looking for celebrations, concerns or surprises, and implications. So I'll move on to professional learning and levels of support needed. So this was really kind of tailoring toward what we knew of current offerings for PD around specifically remote learning. And so a lot of it was through like VTVLC. We were seeing kind of what differentiated options might we want to provide. And VLC is providing a lot, kind of 3 levels of support. So I wanted to see kind of what cohorts might we have, or what number of people would want what level of support from those offerings. Then CCV also does have a graduate course. and then kind of went with some of the more traditional, would you like observation and feedback from an administrator, much like our supervision and evaluation model, but they're observing you teach online, collaboration with tech integrationist, or really tech specific items. And then some of the other respondents are listed below, obviously content specific. And that, I think nothing has stressed more the connection between home and school than remote learning, right? Because it was often, you're relying on parents to be that link between home and school for kids in a very new way. And then you'll see the helpfulness of different tech tools from the teacher's perspective. And it's interesting that they don't necessarily line up to what students may have accessed more regularly, which is, again, just interesting. Different groups responded to different surveys, so you can't really account too much for it, but.
Jess, you may or may not be able to answer this question.
Okay.
Of these tools, do you know how many of them we will be able to still access after July 1? Because I know, for example, Zoom is not one we're accessing.
No. Out of the 29, I do not know. Some of them are ones that we used previous to remote learning anyway. And so I do not know which ones will remain free, that kind of thing. I do know we have, for literacy in specific, our literacy coaches researching kind of based on these results, what was used the most, and what is the platform that we might want to use K-8 to see kind of what comes up as the best possible tools to use, but I do not know. Thankfully, a lot of what comes up is stuff that we know will be free, right? Like YouTube, Google Meet, Google Drive, Google Classroom. Some of these, we have been using.
Just a clarifying question, Jess.
Sure.
Aren't kind of the top 5 under helpfulness, aren't these all ones that all 3 schools have in common?
Yep.
Like every school use Zoom, every school use YouTube, kind of, Google Classrooms and so on. So really, you can't really compare the data, because I know like Khan Academy, I think, was middle school math, but Freckle and Zern were elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So even though elementary school teachers might have ranked that higher, it wouldn't end up being there just because they're not all in common.
I think as the tech team looks at some of these results, they're going to tease out some of that. Like these were the ones that were used at these grade levels. But I would also say, I think for students who might have needed practice or intervention or remediation, that they were using tools that might have been kind of skewed more toward younger grades in order to fill some gaps. So I think assumptions about how these were used could vary, honestly. If you are several grade levels behind in math, you might have ended up using Freckle instead of Khan Academy.
And I also think that for staff who had, to use a statement that gets used a lot, had never done this before, this was the deep end of the pool, and that they stepped right into. And I think that for staff to go out and find other tools that they could use to assist them, I think that really reflects very well on how they handled the whole situation. And I know from districts, particularly in the weather belts, the tornado and hurricane areas, they have these plans and have had them in place for generations, emergency school plans. So for us that are new to this, I think that's very important to see how well the faculty actually went out and found information that they could use.
Mm-hmm.
And to that point, I know, for example, my math department did some meets with former math teachers who were in various states and kind of shared resources and ideas and experiences that they were having. And I actually participated in one of those meetings, and it was, you know, obviously my math department's all here, but there were 5 other states, I think, represented in that meeting. So it was a very interesting perspective of where everybody was at and the kind of tools people were using.
Other things folks want to celebrate? I mean, I think we cannot celebrate enough how teachers really rallied to support students and to transform their instruction on the turn of a dime. And I think, and you've already heard me sing the praises of the instructional leadership team too, but what I was like 3 weeks on maternity leave when this all went down. And that group just rose to the occasion and said, you take care of your babe. We're going to focus on the continuity of learning plan. And I would celebrate that, you know, as much as I can, that there, you've got some incredible people who rallied and became such a team to make this happen for all of our kids. It's amazing. Any concerns, surprises?
I would say the thing that concerned me the most is that 62% of them, granted, again, this is teachers and paras, but 62% saying that their biggest challenge was providing direct instruction. So how does that reflect on what our students actually learned?
And I think it's interesting how one might define direct instruction too, you know, if you were a teacher who really relied on, say, lecture, which I know, you know, is not really, you know, a dominant mode that people are using often, but, you know, some teachers really rely on direct lecture and might have struggled, you know, to function in that way that they might have in the classroom.
I also think too, you know, my experience from my district that I'm just leaving is that scheduling these contacts with students was difficult.
Yes.
So you might, on the one hand, get a good chunk of your students there for a group lesson or independent work, but there might be some students where it's very hard to find time to check in with them individually.
Mm-hmm.
I know that some of the feedback I had from my teachers around direct instruction was difficult in managing a group because people start trying to talk over each other and interrupt, and it was very difficult to manage that. And so then it became more heavily involved where the teacher was just speaking at the students rather than that engagement and question and dialogue and discussion and discourse piece.
Agreed. Yeah, there's no way to kind of circulate and look over a child's shoulder as they're working on Zoom to give that really specific feedback as students are learning.
I think a concern, and it's not a big concern, would be if we have to continue this at any other time, or we need to continue it because there is certain requests by students to continue with remote learning, that are we ready to do so to keep this going?
Mm-hmm. And I think a concern of mine is just more globally is, you know, we're going to have to spend a lot of time of what would be PD time, you know, that there is going to be some great things that come out of this. Like we really are going to have a clearly mapped curriculum because it has to be that way in order to be able to make sure that kids are getting the same outcomes in a lot of their courses. But our PD time is going to be very much, you know, working on remote learning plans, you know, technology training, which are great. as one thing, but what are the other things that might have to take the back burner that were focus areas previously that we were making good headway on? And so just making sure that we're not overwhelming people by constantly adding to the plate, and being conscious about what we kind of have to put pause on in order to take care of this kind of very timely need.
I know one of the challenges and concerns that we're facing as we're planning for the fall is the combination impact. So if we have some students doing remote learning and we have some students that are face-to-face, whether because students can't be in the building or because we have a portion of kids, we have to only have a reduced number of students, how do you blend and manage those two, quite frankly, very different approaches to learning simultaneously? And maybe it's not simultaneously, but then how does that work with still allowing our students to access our course offerings?
Any implications that haven't come up yet? I wonder if folks are thinking about implications of this on our work plan for next year too. I think we'll be checking in a lot more on remote learning. Anything general that folks want to just discuss related to the survey results, debriefing remote learning?
Are we talking with other schools in the area as to their plans for remote learning? That, for example, if we needed to put together like a distance learning class in algebra, for example, if there are enough students who aren't attending school, could there be the possibility for a multi-district algebra class, for example?
Well, Brenda and I just got off a meeting this afternoon, and we've been meeting weekly with the regional principals that send to the Career Center. And we've been talking about ways to meet student needs across all of these school districts in the region. David, we haven't pulled you in yet, but we'd love to have a chance to sit and bend your ear a little bit on what we're starting to head towards. And Brenda and I'll be working together on a plan next week. So yeah, we have been talking to the other high schools in the region, and of course I'm connected to the Career Center directors across the state as well.
And I'm also connected with another group across the state that I meet with every 2 weeks.
Ooh.
Well, that's what, if we're kind of getting back into the general breakdown of remote learning, I'm honestly, Penny, I am so curious how the Career Center continued lessons. Like, how do you teach someone to repair a car or change a tire or, you know, make a meal, like the delicious garlic grilled cheese that I had at the open house? How do you teach students remotely these careers?
Well, you know, obviously it's a really good question, Victoria. And the timing that the closure happened is really what was on our side, because we had covered 6 months or more worth of content with our students. And once we hit April, that's when we start reviewing for the year, and students get ready to take their assessments. So they're getting ready for their IRCs, their credentialing, their licensing exams, closing up dual enrollment classes would have been happening within that 3 to 4 week window. So we had a few teachers do, they came into the building and put together kits with supplies and basic hand tools, and kids came one at a time and picked up their box and took that home and built that structure and was online with the teacher with questions and interactivity. And you can imagine that took a lot more time than it would have if you had all your students doing the same project in your class. We had kits that were delivered, you know, to culinary to emphasize the science component of I don't know exactly what it was Christine McSheffrey was having them make, but she was following up on that. So when this happened, and like Brenda said, we're kind of turned on a dime. But the first thing we did the very next day, once the kids were gone, the teachers reviewed all of their proficiencies that were aligned to their programs to see where the gaps were, what hadn't been covered yet. And we hyper-focused on that, as well as getting kids ready for their assessments. Assessments were tough too, because there's performance components of these assessments. There's usually an online written test, and then there's a performance piece. So, and all those are sponsored and proctored by state and national folks. It's not something local that we do right within our center. And this week, actually, we're working on the emergency services EMT exams, because once those opened up, we were able to start scheduling kids. So it's been very difficult, extremely difficult. The timing is the only thing that was on our side, and the teachers still having access to their spaces to collect materials. They would build their own structure, the teacher would, and then send the materials, and then have the instructions and check in with the kids and hold their classes. So we're also building e-portfolios as well. So all year long, students are taking pictures of their projects and reflecting on those and uploading those as well. So we had a lot practiced, an awful lot of the curriculum practice by the time we got there. If we had to do this starting the year, it'd be a very different thing. We'd be headed into issues around safety and yeah, I'm not sure how that would work starting the year if we had to go completely remote for any length of time. It would be very difficult. So it happened to work out because of the timing, but it was a lot of YouTube demonstrations and Google Meets, one-on-one with kids. And like I said, we had good participation, so the students stayed engaged. I would say right up until that first week of June, which was only a few days before our awards night, and we're able to keep them moving forward. So it was purely the timing. So if all of us had to do that for a 10-12 week window the whole time and have hands-on projects, I can't even imagine what the cost might be when that comes with that, if that came to fruition. So I don't know what that would look like if it were early in the year.
And to piggyback on that, I think that's why we're focusing so heavily planning for the fall around social emotional, because that connectivity, getting to know your kids, knowing what they're capable of, knowing what their capacities are, knowing how to communicate with them is going to be so critical if we have to do this again. We had the issue of Q4 where students had never met particular teachers because it was the quarter. And we actually had a bunch of students that we chose to not put them through that experience because of the stress levels of, you don't know this teacher, you don't really need this class right now, we can reschedule you back face to face, versus some kids we had to because they needed it for graduation and so on. And that was probably one of the most difficult experiences when students were starting a new course with a new teacher that they had never experienced with face to face and didn't have that relationship piece.
I would just add, this is Chris jumping in. Related to that, we're already looking at ways that we can limit the amount of big changes that are going to occur, especially in the first couple weeks of the school year. We're looking at a possible transition, especially with the younger kiddos, to kind of keep them with the team they're currently in. We're not exactly sure how we're going to do that yet, but that is going to be a big piece of this transition, whether we go fully back or we're starting, partially remotely. Because there's so many unknowns for the kids, and we want to limit all the moving parts as much as we can.
Can you just clarify that a little bit, Chris? Do you mean like if you left in first grade, then you go back with your first grade teacher, or is it your first grade teacher following you into second and like a looping?
I think the best way to put that, Victoria, is yes. I mean, it could be a number of those options. So we're looking that that what you just described are two potential scenarios. I don't think we're looking at like a full year loop out of the blue. I mean, that would be an extraordinary undertaking to do. But just to make sure there can be at least the connection and contact with the kiddos' previous teachers. We have to remember they didn't get to have that that physical connection that's so important to young kids, especially for the last 3 months of the school year. And so there's like that, it's kind of a void for them. And I know that that's being discussed at the elementary level, but really even for the younger middle school students as well. So we'll have more answers on that, but I think you just described two potential scenarios, honestly.
So Penny, just one more question for you. The only one that I know is cosmetology students who have a hands-on requirement. Were all of the students able to meet that hands-on despite the early departure, or did the state give some type of waiver?
Yeah, no waiver from the state. That's one of the things when you're going for a state license. They don't make accommodations. They're not too flexible, let's just say. But yes, the week of June 15th, actually, I think it was on the 15th and 16th, Sydney McRitchie was able to set up both the online test and then the hands-on assessment. So all of our students passed both in Cosmo 2, 100% pass rate, and they are submitting their paperwork and their licensing fee to the state and waiting for their license to arrive. And we had pretty much the same percentages pass our electrical and plumbing 1 apprenticeship tests. Those were provided through the Department of Labor and VTC. And so their success rate is pretty similar to what it was last year. So we didn't see a big shift there. And then emergency services for the EMT training, I think, time will tell. We're still finishing that up this week. So we'll know more.
Okay, thank you.
Students in cosmetology, by the way, took home all of their kits, all their hand tools, mannequin heads, when we set up kits for kids to take home when it comes to tools and supplies, it's upwards of $300 to $400 per kit that goes home for the kids. They sign them out, and all of our technology, everything we signed out to kids all came back in a 2-day window, all in excellent shape, all accounted for, no issues whatsoever. So that's a celebration.
Mm-hmm. So Jess, I know John was going to be compiling this data, but I don't know whatever happened to it. Did we ever get kind of how many students are fully attending, how many students are partially attending, how many students are just checking in?
No, he was working on that, and I thought that he had shared it at one point with the board a few weeks ago, but I never got a status on any of that. I can check in with him.
Okay, thanks.
I know he was compiling it, so it has to be somewhere. Might as well not be lost.
Well, I guess, does anyone else have anything for the remote learning?
I have a question, and it's really not related to anything curricula. It's a population question. I was listening to the Ed department on C-SPAN. They were having a Zoom meeting that was televised on C-SPAN, and apparently the feds are making accommodations for some students who may have medical conditions which will preclude them from going back to school. And I was wondering if we have a tally of what we might have in those numbers for students who might be diabetic or asthmatic or in some way impacted health-wise, that the only way they could continue would be through remote learning.
That's not information that I have. And I think I would be honestly looking to the state for giving us some clarity about who is expected to attend. I know they gave a little bit of guidance in their recent packet that came out, but I think it could certainly use some detail, honestly.
Yeah. Because that certainly would have an effect on those kiddos if they are medically fragile and they can't go to school yet.
One of the things, Jess, when you're breaking down the survey content, we had one of the responses was 25% of our respondents would like to continue remote learning in some capacity. So if we could get the breakdown of the grade levels and even schools maybe for those students, that would be great.
I would also add about clarifying on that, if that's full-time or in part. Like there might be some classes they want to do that way, but not necessarily their entire learning experience.
And I think also, you know, I know administrators and teachers are, you know, worried that students think that how remote learning happened in the last 3 months is how it would always happen. And that I think expectations would change significantly, which might, you know, change that number to higher or lower at any given time.
Just to clarify a little bit, because I think going off of Alice's question, that we could have a lot of kids who are in some way immunocompromised. And so if it were, you know, preschoolers, first graders, second graders, third graders, I think we need to know who to be targeting for these types of things eventually when we head back, if we're looking at class size limits and things like that, to find out who's interested in continue remote learning. So that way we can be making more specific plans for those students and not, I'll say, spending a lot of time on different groups who don't want it. So is there anything else for remote learning before we, I guess, move on to our next?
Victoria, I just want to follow up on what you just said. So it sounds to me like this group, this committee might have further conversations around choice. You know, students have choice for high school in some of our regions. And so is there going to be a choice of remote and face-to-face, regardless of whether a student is ill or parents are concerned or there's other underlying conditions? Is that a message we want to put out, that there might be an option of either or? And then if it is, then I'm really curious as to how we're going to staff all of that. If there was a fairly large number, even a third, I would say, of your students, if they were choosing or wanted to do online, how we would deliver that with the staffing that we have. So just, I'm curious about what that might look like.
Well, I think one of the conversations that I honestly don't recall who I had it with was that we might have teachers who are immunocompromised and unable to come into the classrooms, and perhaps that those could be your remote teachers, so that we could be pairing them with students who want to continue remote learning. But this way we're not losing students to a homeschool environment because we're unable to provide remote learning.
True, true. And I'm still wondering how to have that conversation with my staff and what are the legal parameters around even asking that question, and in a timely fashion so we can plan and not find out the first week of school. So I would love some guidance around that.
David, you're muted.
That also was part of the discussion that the Federal Agency of Education, Department of Education, was having about what could be the fall rate of faculty who can't attend because they are in some way immunocompromised. And what to do about that, because staffing of schools across the nation right at this moment is very difficult. So I'm sure we'll get info from somewhere.
David, you're still on mute.
I know,
There you
I
go.
realized that's why this wasn't working. Can I go back and fill in the technology survey, Jessica? Yeah. No, but I think this is a good point. And it'll be part of our planning. We continue to get guidance from the state. Last week, they gave their overall guidance about a safe and healthy start of school. Today, I was part of a VISBIT training on planning for reentry into school. So the answers to questions about what do you do with students who aren't able to come to school for a variety of reasons, those answers, they're not answered yet. Those questions aren't answered yet. But we need to think of those, and we will need to think of staff who might not be able to return. One thing I'd caution us is before we give choices that we might not be able to give, I think we should have that be part of our planning, so we do it in a planful way. But we will absolutely need to consider that.
Okay, anyone else, or can we wrap up remote learning for now?
Thank you all. Lots of good notes here.
Okay, is there any old business that anyone wants to discuss? Any other business? Future business.
I would just say another look if there's time to disaggregate that data on the survey, if there's a chance to dive in a little bit, find the commonalities, and then find the gaps that each school has or grade level.
I should have filled in some that I think the admin team and the COVID planning team are going to dive more into a lot of this information. And so I don't think it's probably the work of this group necessarily to look into it at that grade level, just because come August, it's too late. The next time we see each other, it'll be too late to respond to some of this feedback.
Victoria?
Yes, Andrea.
Were you, I thought, going to talk about learning, yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Given the recent events and the statement put out from the school, I thought we were going to be adding something here.
So actually my plan was to add that to a future agenda. Given that I had some email conversation with Jess, I wanted to, one, give it so that it would be warned in a meeting that was what we were discussing, so that we could get a little more public input, and also to have a better breakdown of what's actually being taught in each of our schools. So as an item for future agenda, discussing the anti-racism curriculum within our schools, given the recent board statement. So however you would like to add that for a future agenda, Andrea, would be much appreciated. But this way it's warned so that the public knows that it's happening. Does anyone have any, oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering, are
Go
you
ahead,
thinking
Jess.
kind of maybe like a check-in about plans for an equity audit? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, that's correct. And so I believe our next scheduled meeting is July. Andrea, do you have the date for me? But will we be discussing the family survey at that one?
The 28th of July.
Thank you.
I can provide folks with the family data at that point. I am not available on the 28th. I thought we normally skipped July. That's what I was told, that all the committees take a break for July, but I can provide that information to folks for that meeting.
Okay, well, would everyone, oh, sorry, Penny.
I won't be available for that July meeting either, but I'm always open for whatever you need specifically from tech. Just let me know.
Okay, thank you. Alice and Tim, do you have a conflict on the date too, or is this a meeting that you'd like to keep on the books?
At this time, I don't have any conflict, but that doesn't mean that on July 20th, I might have one.
I don't have any conflict that I can think of.
Okay, so we'll keep it on the books. So I guess if you can just provide the information, Jess, so that we can have a discussion about it, that would be great. I guess if we can have the follow-up of the survey as well, of the student and staff surveys, just kind of broken down a little bit more. Yes, Penny.
I'm looking on the calendar and it says the curriculum committee for July 8th was canceled.
Well, then I guess it was canceled. So I guess we can push this to August. If we've officially canceled, then.
I don't know.
Well, I guess
someone got the memo that July was a break for folks.
There you go.
I can
So
look at the old minutes, and typically a lot of times July is a month off, but with the incoming new superintendent and the COVID, that's pretty much gone out the window this year.
Yeah.
Because there's so very much to get accomplished.
I would recommend, if you had a topic where you wanted public input, to not put it in July when many people might be out of town or might not be able to be at the meeting, if you want the most number of people to be present.
okay, then I'll nix it and I'll say that we will cancel July and we'll just move all of these agenda items to August. Even though I'm not comfortable really with the surveys, is there any way that you could be sending out the survey results to us, Jess, prior to our August meeting? So that way we can, if we need to have a discussion, we can do a little emailing back and forth instead?
I was muted. Yes, I can do that.
Oh, perfect. And from our last year's work plan, what did we have for an August schedule? I honestly don't remember.
I feel like August was you had organizational business. I think because it was a new district, right, or something. It was the first meeting since the merger or something. I remember our first was just talking about priorities for this team that year.
Right, but did we do our work plan through August or not? Because remember,
no.
we discussed about bumping everything for a few things, and I'm trying to pull up the email file right now.
Yep. We did not plan through August. Nope, we planned through the end of the school year.
Okay, even with bumping, we didn't put anything there?
Nope. So perhaps that should be in our August agenda, is to rework our annual work plan for the new school year.
Sounds good.
Does that sound good?
Okay, does anyone have anything else that they'd like to discuss in the August agenda? Hearing none, I guess we're good. What are we at now? I guess our future meeting date is August. Andrea, you can always help me out on this. August 25th, I believe.
I haven't gotten quite that far yet. I'm sorry.
You haven't?
I'm sorry.
The fourth Tuesday in August is the 25th. So I guess the August 25th at 5:30.
Okay.
Do we still do a motion to adjourn, Andrea, or is it by consensus?
It is by consensus, my dear.
Okay, does everyone consent that we have nothing else to discuss? Yay, thumbs up. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye all.